During the Civil War in 1862, the U.S. government passed the Homestead Act, granting citizens 160 acres of surveyed government land, providing they had never bore arms against the U.S. government. The folks staking the claim could either pay $1.25 per acre, make slight improvements to the land, and then have full ownership after 6 months, or they could live on their land, cultivate it, and then own it free and clear after 5 years. Designed to promote westward expansion, the act was a pretty sweet deal. Following the Civil War, many Americans were heading west into the plains, claiming land and setting up homesteads. The U.S. government moved the Osage Indians from land in Labette County, Kansas, to new territory that would later become Oklahoma. The vacated land in Kansas would then be given to citizens making homestead claims. And this is where today's story takes place.
Darlene and I would like to let you know about an opportunity coming up on Sunday, April 28th at 2 p.m. In Asheboro, at the old Asheboro Cemetery located on West Salisbury Street. Ricky Allred will take you through a walk through the past as he strolls the grounds of the cemetery, telling you stories and historical tidbits about the people who rest there. There is no charge for the tour. If you're a history buff, you definitely don't want to miss it. Once again, that tour is Sunday, April 28th at 2 o'clock p.m.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
Before we start, is there anything you have going on that you wanted to share, or?
Oh, I just got back from Florida.
Oh, yeah.
I went to a ladies' retreat with both of my daughter-in-laws, Journey and Riley, and my granddaughter, Ailey. And my mom actually has an annual ladies' retreat. And so we just got to go down and visit with family and hear some really great speakers and just get refreshed and revived and renewed. And then I came back and got sick.
Right. So
but it was so good.
I'm glad y'all got to go.
Me too. It was worth it.
It looked like y'all had a really good time.
We did.
Awesome.
So how about you?
Well, I'm just, I'm tutoring a class this year that's getting ready to finish up, and we're doing mock trial. So I've really just been, my whole life has been eat, sleeping, and repeat of mock trial stuff.
I bet.
So that's really all I've got going on.
It's so neat, though. You're going to have to tell us about it when it's done.
I will. It's
okay. Perfect.
Oh, but I did think of something about mock trial because, we're getting close to the event, and we just, for my class, we had this practice night meeting type thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you remember this, but when our older kids were in this same class 2 years ago, and they were doing mock trial, and you and I had met the year before, and you had been talking about doing a podcast, mm-hmm. and then you had put that question out to me, would I be interested in doing it with you?
Yes.
And that night when we met for that class for the mock trial is when you and I met together and said, are we doing this?
Yeah.
Yep, we're doing this.
We solidified it.
And we solidified it. And so I was just thinking the other night when I had that same class, I'm like, it was 2 years ago that Darlene and I said, we're doing the podcast.
And we have ate, slept, and breathed it.
The whole time. Yeah. Okay.
That's awesome.
For my episode today,
yes,
I'm going to do a little shout out to my sister.
Okay.
You'll see why in just a minute.
Which sister?
My sister, Kim.
Okay.
She actually has sent a gift for the two of us.
Oh.
So I'm going to let you open it first.
Okay. That's so sweet.
It is very
Thank you, Kim.
It's very sweet. All right, that one's yours.
Okay. Oh my goodness. I love it. Wow. Thank you so much.
She had these made for us.
It's a Hard Times and True Crimes podcast Tumblr with our names on it.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh my goodness.
And she had them made. There's a place in Julian. It's called the Peddler's Workshop.
I've heard of that.
Okay. And actually that's my aunt.
Really?
Yeah, that's my Aunt Sandy. So she had these made for us there. And we have matching tumblers now.
I really love this.
Yeah. We will have to get a picture and put it on the Facebook group.
Yes, so we definitely will.
I will post pictures.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Yeah, thank you. But that's not the only reason I am doing a shout out for her today.
Okay.
This episode is about the Bender family.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of them?
I have heard of them, but I'm excited I don't know a whole bunch about them.
Okay. So my sister's name is Kim Bender.
It's her married name. She's married to Joe Bender.
Okay. All right.
So Kim, this episode's for you. After the war between the states ended, the American people found themselves with an opportunity for free land. And this began the Great Migration out west, with many families taking advantage of that really good opportunity. Mm-hmm. And one such family was the Benders. In 1871, John Bender Sr. and John Jr. arrived in Labette County, Kansas, to stake a claim of their own. And months later, they would be joined by Ma Bender and Kate.
Okay.
Their claim was adjacent to the Osage Trail, which was like a well-known Native American trail through the Plains states. Okay. And this was at that time, it was the only open road traveling west. So basically, if you're traveling west, you're going to end up going right by the Bender's place.
Okay.
And it's no surprise that the family, they capitalized on that location to draw in weary travelers.
Sure.
You know what they say, location, location, location.
That's right.
Well, the family of 4, and they were believed to be German immigrants, they were made up of Pa Bender, who was John Sr., Ma Bender, her name was Elvira, John Gebhardt, or John Jr., he was called both at times, and Kate or Katie Bender.
Okay. Those sound like very American names.
They do, yes. So maybe if they came from Germany, they probably just adopted those names, yeah. It was believed that John and Kate were brother and sister and the son and daughter of Ma and Pa. Okay. But later, some people asserted that John and Kate claimed to be man and wife. Oh. They were rumored to act in that manner, if you get my drift.
Okay.
And one newspaper actually said of Kate, she bore a slippery character on the point of morality. Ah. She was known to be an advocate of free love, which I didn't think that came about until the 60s.
I know.
The 1960s, not the 1860s. But apparently there was some kind of movement during that time.
And I would imagine, though, out west, you had all sorts of types.
Oh, I bet so. Yeah. So Pa Bender, being in his mid-60s, he spoke very limited English, and he didn't really care to try to speak it any better. I mean, he's in his 60s. He was not much for conversation anyway, and so he would grunt or just speak 1 or 2 answer words if you would talk to him. And it was usually in a thick German accent if he had to respond at all. Ma Bender, she was around age 55, they think, and she could speak a bit more, but she was pretty limited in her English as well. But she was known to be gruff and not really easy to get along with.
Okay.
And later, her neighbors would refer to her as a she-devil.
Oh, gosh.
So that tells you what they thought of her. Mm-hmm. Years after these events, neighbors would realize they didn't even know Ma Bender's first name. They just knew her as Ma.
Wow. I wonder if that's because of the English barrier, though.
Probably.
Yeah.
Most likely. John Jr., who was around 25, he actually could speak fluent English, but it was with his German accent. And he actually had this weird habit of giggling at weird times, this spontaneous giggle. And so, it made people think that he may not be all there.
Right.
Yeah, it was just weird, a little odd. And then there was 23-year-old Kate. She spoke the best English of any of the family. Okay. And it's a good thing because she had a little side hustle going. While they had chosen their claim based on the location, like we said, as a stopping place for travelers, Kate was also a self-proclaimed healer and psychic.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Ladies, I don't know about you, but over the last few years, Melly and I have noticed differences in our skin that have been pretty discouraging. You know, the inevitable signs of aging, fine lines, some wrinkles here and there, dull, dry skin, and sunspots. Thankfully, there's a non-invasive treatment available without having to go under the knife. Tasha Briles at Lakeside Integrative in High Point, North Carolina, offers a total skin package that includes radio frequency microneedling and laser skin resurfacing that can be done right in her office in under an hour. It stimulates collagen growth and elastin that improves the surface and texture of your skin, as well as tightening it. The laser treats acne scars, minimizes large pores, and lessens, if not completely fades, sunspots. Melody and I were blessed to get this treatment in late fall. We're going back for our after photos within a couple of weeks, and we'll be sure to post them on our Facebook group. Melody was just saying how she felt like it gave her a fresh start for her skin routine. It even cleared up some precancerous skin lesions she had, and it faded my sunspots completely, as well as brightened and tightened my skin. We're really thrilled with our results. Lakeside Integrative offers an array of other services for men and women, as well as fillers, laser hair removal, weight loss, hormone, and medical treatments. Don't walk, run to the phone and call Lakeside Integrative to set up your appointment at 336-715-0007. Tell them Darlene and Melody from Hard Times and True Crime sent you. Oh, wow. It is surprising. I don't know if it's because we're from the Bible Belt that, that would be a big thing back then.
And it is, but actually there were like 4 or 5 families in that area who were actually called spiritualists.
Wow. Okay.
So she advertised her services on flyers that she passed out, and she even passed them out at the Sunday school.
Oh my gosh.
Where she attended Harmony Grove Church. I know that's weird to us because we're like, yeah, that's not going to fly.
No.
You're not going to come to our church and advertise your mystic.
Exactly.
Whatever. Yeah. Spiritualism was flourishing in Kansas at that time. Well, both John Jr. and Kate were described as being attractive. He had auburn hair and flint blue eyes. Mm. She was described as beautiful, voluptuous, warm, and with a likable personality.
Okay.
So kind of the opposite of Ma.
Yeah.
She was also, she was mysterious due to the spiritualism aspect of what she did, and men were kind of drawn to her.
Oh, I'm sure, especially when they realized she was an advocate of free love.
Right. And they're out there on the prairie. There were a lot of lonely men out there.
Exactly.
So you could see she was pretty popular attraction, right? Mm-hmm. So she didn't have any trouble drawing in weary travelers. Let's just put it that way. Pa and John Jr. immediately began working on their claim. They dug a well and a cellar. They threw together this crude stable and a corral, and they built a cabin. The 16 by 24 foot cabin was home to all 4 of them, and it was like one room, and it was used as an inn and a grocery store.
Is that not insane?
That's hard to believe. I'm like, I can't really imagine that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Their front room had a stove. There were some shelves with supplies for sale, although it was kind of a really meager selection. And there was like this large curtain from floor to ceiling that would divide the cabin in half. So you have kind of 2 rooms, but it's just a curtain. Behind the curtain was their sleeping area, which held straw mattresses. And then one of those mattresses actually covered a trap door that led into the cellar from inside. The Bender family hung their sign on the door advertising they were open for business. It read groceries, but it was spelled Grocries.
Oh, gosh.
Groceries. I don't know. But I don't want to say they were illiterate, but English wasn't their native language.
Sure.
That's probably the problem there. And business was booming. Travelers didn't have much choice out there. So when they're going by, they're going to stop and, feed their animals, grab something to eat, and sleep a night on that straw mattress because it's better than sleeping outside. They didn't have the luxury of Holiday Inn back then. Yeah. During this time, it also was not uncommon for travelers to go missing out in the Midwest. And if you think about it, I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen when you're traveling. There's storms, like the hard traveling conditions, Indians.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Other travelers who maybe weren't so good people, and wild animals.
Right.
Just a lot of unknowns during that time. A lot of things could happen under those conditions, and a lot of things did happen under those conditions.
Right. I'm sure there were so many like bandits too who just preyed on travelers.
Vigilantes, yep. Somewhere around late 1870 and early 1871, they did notice that men were going missing along the trail. So enough that it got a little bit suspicious. At first, it wasn't apparent because people went a long time without corresponding.
Right.
You know, you had,
if you wanted telephones.
If you wanted to let somebody know you had reached your destination, you still had to go to the nearest post office or whatever to send that.
Yeah.
But in May of 1871, 2 young boys were playing out near Drum Creek, and they discovered the body of a man named Jones. They, of course, immediately went and told somebody, and when people got out there, they discovered that the body had a smashed skull and a slit throat.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And at first, the owner of the claim that was Drum Creek was located on, he was the suspect, but they didn't have any proof.
Yeah.
And so they didn't really take any action because what could they do? That was all they had. Several months later, in February of 1872, 2 more men are found dead in the area, and they had similar injuries as to the Jones guy. People starting to worry a little more at this point.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And we just talked about how, violence wasn't really uncommon due to you had the horse thieves, the vigilantes, like you talked about. But this kind of seemed to take it up a notch.
Yeah.
And as word kind of began to spread between the townspeople that were nearby, people began to kind of like avoid the trail if they could.
Yeah.
Like travelers coming from a long way really couldn't.
Okay.
But if you kind of were in the area, you might be like,
you knew to stay away.
Avoid that. Yeah. Time goes by, and 1 year later, during the winter of 1873, a man named George Lonker was traveling from Kansas to Iowa with his 18-month-old daughter, Mary Ann. George's wife had died, and he really just needed to start over. His little girl's getting bigger. He needs help from family to raise her. And so he decides he's going to travel back to Iowa. To make the journey, he purchased some horses and a wagon from his neighbor, Dr. William York. And Dr. York told him, "Let me know when you've arrived in Iowa." Well, after quite some time had passed, and York had never heard back from George, he thought that was very odd. Like, I haven't heard back that he's gotten there. And then later, he heard rumor that a horse and wagon had been found abandoned at Fort Scott, Kansas. So York, who I think is a pretty good neighbor, he decided he was concerned enough he was going to go in search of George and his little girl.
That is a good neighbor.
Yeah. So he took the Osage Trail to Fort Scott, where he actually identified that horse and wagon that was found abandoned as the ones that he had sold to George. Dr. York heads back home, and he stops all along the trail and questions these different homesteaders. As he comes by their claim, he'll stop and ask them if they've seen them, heard from them, knew anything about them. And he even stopped at the Bender family's inn for a rest night. He stayed overnight, and he was never heard from again.
Oh.
Dr. York never was heard from.
Okay.
Now, Dr. York's disappearance did not go unnoticed by any means. He happened to have 2 brothers. One was a colonel at Fort Scott, Colonel Ed York. Okay. And the other one was Alexander York, a Kansas senator who lived in Independence, which is just 11 miles from the Bender's homestead.
Okay.
They were well aware of Dr. York's travel plans and immediately began a search for their brother when they did not hear from him at the expected time. They went door to door questioning homesteaders along the route. In March of 1873, they stopped at the Bender's place. Colonel York, with a traveling companion, inquired. He was told that his brother had stayed there with him one night, but had left, and perhaps he had run into some problems with some of the Native Americans in the area. Mm-hmm. Colonel York had to admit that was a possibility, and he stayed for dinner with the family.
Okay,
and then he went on back home.
Okay.
However, within just a few days, he returned to their cabin with more questions. He had caught wind of a rumor that a young woman had fled their cabin once after she had been threatened with a knife by a mawbender. And she said she had ran out. She said it was very eerie, and she was terrified, and she ran off. York's brother goes back and questions them again. And Katie and John Jr., of course, deny anything had happened. And Ma, who did not speak much English, she was just kind of sitting there listening to it all.
Right.
But as they continued to talk, York and Katie and John, Ma is getting furious. And finally, she went off and demanded that he leave her cabin.
In English?
Yes. And that gave away that maybe her lack of English wasn't as bad as she was putting on.
Right.
That raised some questions, like we didn't even think she could understand us.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, she knows what we're saying and she kicks us out.
Okay.
But the ever helpful Kate, she did tell Colonel York if he returned to the cabin alone the following week, she would use her clairvoyant abilities to help him find his brother. Very wisely, he did not take her up on that offer.
Yeah, I bet she would have used them.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Come back, but by yourself.
Right.
That's not suspicious at all. This did not throw off the York brothers. They wanted their brother found, and they had just enough clout to push the issue. Before this, if people had gone missing and a search turned up no clues, like eventually families had to give up because they didn't really have the resources to continue.
Sure.
But that wasn't the case with Dr. York. You got a senator and a colonel. You might have chosen the wrong person. Yeah. His disappearance spurred a lot of publicity, an all-out investigation, really. By this time, the neighbor that York had gone and searched for, he still had never turned up either. Okay. So now, at least,
so we've got the neighbor's child.
Yes.
And then the doctor.
Who went looking for the neighbor.
Okay.
All three missing.
Plus others.
Yeah. Well, because of all that publicity, now people are starting to come forward with more tales of being threatened by the Benders. Some said they had gotten this bad feeling while they were in the cabin and had left abruptly. Some claimed they had been assaulted or that murder had been attempted on them.
By a whole family?
By a whole family. And it was becoming clear that this family probably should be looked at a little bit more closely. So around this time, neighboring communities, like now they're getting really worried. They decide we're going to have a meeting. We've got to do something about this. We're going to meet and figure out what it is. When they met, there were 75 people in attendance, including Colonel York, but also including Pa Bender and John Jr. were at the meeting. And it was agreed at that meeting that they were going to get a search warrant for every single homestead along the trail between Big Hill Creek and Drum Creek, because that's where the trails on all of these people seem to have dropped off. That's when they were not heard from. Just a few days after this, a neighbor of the Benders, his name was Billy Toll, he was driving by the homestead. I say driving. He was driving his horses by the homestead. He noticed the place kind of looked abandoned. And the animals outside looked unfed. Okay. So he thought, I'm going to go check that out. That looked strange. And he didn't see anybody around. It was like, it looks like this place has been abandoned. He, of course, goes and tells everybody. And so several hundred people volunteer to come and help search the place for this family. So at this point, Pa and John Jr. have been to that meeting.
Right.
They know they're about to be questioned. The families all of a sudden abandon the place. It's looking like they're looking pretty guilty.
Looking fairly suspicious.
Everybody's starting to think, we want to know what's been going on over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they start searching. And at first, they didn't find anything. There were some groceries left on the shelves. I mean, obviously, some of the animals were left behind and hungry, but nothing. But they go in the cabin. But when they went in, there was a horrible odor coming from the floor.
Okay.
When they finally moved one of those straw mattresses and that revealed that trap door to the cellar that they found, the smell was considerably worse. And the door had been nailed shut. So once they get the door pried open, do you want to guess what they found in the cellar?
A body.
Actually, no.
No?
They did not find a body. There was a 6-foot deep room. There was clotted blood all over the floor.
Okay.
But no bodies. But the men, they literally could smell death. They start digging up the stone floor, thinking maybe something's under the stone. And no bodies.
Okay.
So then
That's shocking.
I know. Then they even physically lifted the cabin up and moved it to the side off of the top of the cellar so that they could continue to dig under where that slab had been pulled up. And nothing except a lot of blood and a lot of smell, the smell of death. And also a search of the cabin did turn up 3 hammers, which they thought were the murder weapons.
Okay, so they're believing.
Oh, they believe that obviously these missing people are dead, and they're pretty sure they're
at the hands of the Benders.
Yes.
Okay.
They just can't find any bodies to prove it. They're like, well, if they did it, where's everybody at?
Right.
So they continued to search on the property, and they started using ramrods to tap into the soil and kind of tap around. They did that in the vegetable garden, and there was some newly disturbed soil in the orchard. They keep looking. That evening, Colonel Ed York, who was still searching for his missing brother, he kind of noticed a place in the orchard that had a crack in the soil. And he used the ramrod to probe in that spot, and he did hit something about 4 feet down. So the men began to furiously dig in that area. The putrid smell coming up to meet them was so strong that some of them physically got sick.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
They just they were puking. Yeah. So they knew that they were probably going to find something not so great.
Yeah.
And when the first body was uncovered, Ed found himself looking into the face of his brother, Dr. William York.
Oh, my gosh.
William had been tossed into the pit in nothing but his undershirt. His throat had been slashed, just as those other bodies previously had, and his head had been smashed.
Okay. Oof.
The night is starting to get dark. It's really cold out there on the prairie. So they decided to stop digging for the night. Many of the crowd went home to rest, up for the next day, but a lot of people just stayed there and camped out on the property because they didn't want to miss anything the next morning.
Right.
The next morning, digging resumed, and by the end of the day, they had found 9 bodies in 8 graves, as well as many body parts.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to know about the baby.
Oh, we're getting to that.
Okay. Oh.
All but one of those bodies had been bludgeoned and their throats slit.
Okay.
And it was also said that the bodies had been, quote unquote, indecently mutilated.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Like evil stuff.
Yeah. By a family.
Right.
Ew, okay.
George Lanker was found, and his little girl's body with him. She had been buried in the same grave. She was found in her knitted blanket, still wearing her dress and mittens.
Oh my gosh.
Her body had no apparent injuries, which, makes you kind of relieved to hear she hadn't been killed in such a gruesome way as everybody else.
Yeah.
But that relief only lasts for a second until you realize what the searchers suspected. Do you?
That they put her in there alive?
Yes. I mean,
oh my gosh.
That's the conclusion
that
they came to. Horrible.
Worse. Yeah, that's worse.
It is worse. It is worse. I mean, like, just the thought of that is too much. It's just too much. So, evil. I mean, this is an evil family. Who could do that? These discoveries made headline news during the day. The onlookers came out of the woodwork. More than 3,000 people descended on the Bender homestead, all hoping to get a glimpse of the findings or take home a piece of the crime scene.
My gosh.
Reporters start swarming in. I mean, they have a story that's going to sell newspapers for months.
Oh, yeah.
Soon, the reports are getting exaggerated for sensationalism.
Sure.
Many of the articles were contradictory to one another. I read some of them. It was crazy. Some newspapers would describe Kate as pretty and easy to look at, and then the next one would describe her as an old hag.
Okay.
We've seen that a lot in the newspaper. One newspaper reported that a Bible had been in the found in the house with notes on the family page written in German. Well, they had several German immigrant families in the area at the time, and so one of the neighbors translated those notes, and it said, "Big Slaughter Day, January 8th."
Oh, my God.
Now, that could mean animals. We don't know, but it almost doesn't sound...
I know.
In light of the events, it just sounds more ominous.
And it being in the Bible.
Yeah.
I don't know. Which
and then there was
weird
just
either way, I guess.
Yeah. And then there was like this just one phrase, "Hail departed."
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, whatever that means. And then they found a Catholic prayer book with notes in it that read, "Joanna Bender, born July 30th, 1848. John Gebhardt came to America July 1st, 18, and then the last 2 numbers couldn't really be read."
Okay.
So whatever that meant. The newspaper accounts inflated the body count to like over 50, but there's no evidence to corroborate that.
Okay.
They do know it was more than the 9 intact bodies they found.
Okay.
And there are other people that had gone missing during that time that they were suspicious of, but there's nothing to solidify that there were 50.
Okay.
The Kansas Democrat christened the site where all those bodies were found in the orchard as Hell's Half-Acre. As investigators tried to put the puzzle pieces together, their theory was that when the Benders would have guests in the house who seemed to be wealthy. They would seat them at the place of honor at the table, and that was the seat that was positioned right over that trap door to the cellar, and it was up against that canvas curtain dividing the room. Kate, they thought, would distract the guest, and one of the men would come from behind the curtain and strike the guest in the temple with a hammer, shattering his skull. And once they found all those smashed skulls and then those hammers, that's how they put that together.
Okay.
Then one of them would slit the throat, ensuring the victim's death. And then from there, it was easy to just drop the body in the trap door to the floor beneath. And then that way, if somebody else showed up, you know, there's no evidence. And then they could take the money and the valuables from their victim. And then later, when they had the chance, they would move the body to the orchard to bury it in a shallow grave. Many bullet holes in the walls and roof of the cabin suggested that some of the victims had even tried to fight back. Can you imagine that?
No. I can't imagine the horror.
Horror.
Yeah. Ugh.
Also, some of their victims didn't really have valuables or money, so it was unclear whether the family just made a mistake when they chose their victim or if they just enjoyed what they were doing.
Yeah, serial killers.
Like maybe they just wanted to kill them. And they did become known, I think, as the first serial killing family in the U.S.
Okay.
Which makes you wonder, like, what, there's more serial killing families?
I was just thinking, I don't know of any others.
Well, hold on to your seat.
Okay.
So then came speculation that there were others in the area who had helped the family fence the stolen goods that they had taken off of the victims. There could have been as many as 12 people who helped with the crimes. One man came forward named Mitt Cherry, and he admitted to being part of those 12 people. He claimed that when the Benders killed a man, they would forge a letter to his wife from him, making it seem like he had reached his destination. And Mitt said he was the one who had forged at least one such letter, maybe more. And he's also the one who implicated others in helping fence the stolen goods. Kansas Senator Alexander York offered a $1,000 reward for the arrest of the Bender family. Another $2,000 was offered by Governor Thomas Osborne. People were searching. Not only did they want that reward money, but many were just not even motivated by money, just solely by bringing justice to these families and making their prairie safe again.
Yeah.
Eventually, searchers found the abandoned wagon and starving horses that had belonged to the Bender family, the ones they had taken with them.
Okay.
About 12 miles north of the inn. And the reason they knew that wagon belonged to them was their wagon actually had, the axle in the back was wider than in the front. So it left a track. You could tell it was very a different track. Okay. And so they were able to track until they found the wagon itself and determined that, yeah, that's theirs because it's got that weird axle on it. It was determined that the running family had bought railroad tickets to Humboldt. And then when they got there, that the older Benders continued on their journey to Kansas City and possibly later on to St. Louis, Missouri, while John and Kate split up from them and took a few other trains here and there, ultimately leading them to a border region between Texas and New Mexico.
Okay.
It appeared the Benders had escaped. However, not everybody believes they got away. There are a lot of other theories and claims of what happened to them. And I'm not even going to go into all of them, but I'll give you a few of them here. There's one story that a group of vigilantes found the family and shot all of them but Kate, whom they buried alive. Which would be fitting.
It would.
There is a claim from
Except for they all should have been buried alive.
After that poor baby.
Yes.
I know. Oh. There's a claim from another group that they found them, lynched them, and threw them into the Verdigris River.
Okay.
One detective claimed to have traced Kate and John Jr. down just to find that John had died of apoplexy, which, like, I think I looked it up. It was a cerebral hemorrhage.
Okay.
And then there was Pinkerton detective agent Nathan Pierce, who went searching for him. He assured the locals he would capture Kate with ease. However, he disappeared into the Wichita Mountains and was never heard from again.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonder if he did find him then.
Makes you wonder. So this is a claim that I found kind of exceptionally interesting.
Okay.
So this is a story told by a man named John Downer. He said he had been with Colonel York's original search party at the Bender place in 1873. Later in 1909, he was diagnosed with a terminal disease, and on his deathbed, he felt the need to clear his conscience. So he confessed to a lawyer in the presence of a few other witnesses that he had helped capture and kill the Benders. He struggled to finish his story before he died. Like, it literally was on his deathbed. It was like you see in the movies where you're barely whispering it out between your breaths. The witnesses did swear that he said it, and they signed like a written record of his account.
I wonder why they wouldn't have said.
Who wouldn't have said?
Like, why they wouldn't have just said that they caught them and killed them.
Well, he said he had kept this secret. You got to keep in mind, he was in a search party with the colonel and the Kansas senator.
Oh.
So if it was vigilante justice.
Yes.
And you're sworn to secrecy because you don't want to implement a senator.
That is so true.
That sounds believable, doesn't it?
It actually does sound believable.
And I kind of hope it happened.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. Like, again, there's just so many stories, but what makes that one also seem a little bit more believable is this other story that kind of ties to it.
Okay.
And it also ties to North Carolina. This was printed in the Evening Visitor newspaper out of Raleigh, North Carolina in December of 1880. In the article, a police officer claimed that he had had a conversation with another ex-police officer outside of a local dancing hall one night. A tall, raw-boned woman walked past them, and the man whispered, "By God, that's her," and went on to tell him that he had been living in Kansas at the time of the Benders' crimes. And according to him, he was part of the original search party of the property and of the group.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that within 2 days of tracking them, the group spotted the family across the prairie. The family then knew they were getting ready to get caught. They burned their wagons and took to the woods. Now, I don't know about the burned wagon because they found a wagon that belonged to them. So there's like one of those things that sometimes when the rumor mill goes, details change.
Unless they got another one.
True that. They could have abandoned that one and stolen one somewhere.
Sure.
So they pursued them further into the woods. And he says they eventually caught up with them and they found John Sr., Ma. So they found Pa, Ma, and John Jr., and they tied them to trees and shot them. They did not, however, find Kate. And he said it was 2 years later before he heard the words from a dying man. He said that dying man reported that Kate had been dressing up like a man, disguising herself, and had actually joined one of the search parties herself.
Oh, my God.
And that's how she managed to get away. She acts like she's searching for them, and she's dressed like a man.
That is insane.
It's just crazy enough that it might be true.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the truth is always stranger than fiction.
Is.
So then he said she somehow ended up in North Carolina after she got away and was married to a man or dating a man with the last name of Foss. And Foss had at first denied that that was Kate, but then he said to him, he later admitted to the officer that, yeah, that was indeed Kate Bender, and that now she had left Foss and was living alone and was still in hiding and in disguise. And that was a newspaper account that came from.
That is crazy.
And when they said the words of a dying man had said that, it makes you wonder if he had been there when that John Downer had confessed that they had done that. I mean, it's like it kind of lines up.
It really does. That is insane.
So that one to me held a little weight.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we don't know if it's true.
That definitely makes sense, though, about why he would have waited to have said anything. And then before he died, wanted to clear his conscience. And
And I want that one to be true.
I know.
To me, that just seems like the best justice.
Yes.
I want that one to be the true story.
And for the brothers to have been able to see it done.
Yes. It just seems like it's fitting there, too. They don't really know what happened for sure, though, because if that did happen, that a lot of people would have taken that to their graves, except John Donner.
Right.
But no one ever claimed the reward money.
Okay.
Even all the people who came forward and said, I took care of this and claimed it, none of them ever took the reward money or claimed it. The Benders' names stayed in the papers for years. People even capitalized on it. One store ran an ad that read, "It's hard to find the Benders, but you can find all kinds of fruit jars at Engel's drugstore."
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine? That made me a little bit think of at the end of our episodes when Curtis like,
oh, I know.
If you,
yes,
he makes these good fortune promises that if you listen to Hard Times and True Crimes. So I thought that was kind of funny. But Curtis may want to rethink that angle because that particular store owner was later arrested after he himself was mistaken for Pa Bender.
Are you serious?
I am serious.
That is so funny.
Yeah. They became such a legend that over the years, if anybody saw like a couple of women traveling together alone, people would be like, oh, that's Ma and Kate Bender. And then finally, in 1889, 2 women were arrested for theft in Michigan. It was a Mrs. Almira Monroe and Mrs. Sarah Eliza Davis.
Okay.
And they bore a strong resemblance to Ma and Kate. 2 witnesses identified them as Ma and Kate after seeing their photos. And after they were questioned, Mrs. Davis, she signed an affidavit confirming that, yeah, Mrs. Monroe is the famous Ma Bender. I'm not Kate, but that's Ma. And then the Almira denied that. And she's like, no, I'm not Ma, but that's Kate.
Oh, my gosh.
And so I should mention that the one that was known as Sarah at the time, Sarah Eliza, who they thought was Kate, she was a single mother of 4 children at that point.
Okay.
So they were both content to point the finger at one another. To quote the Evening News newspaper out of Kansas, Sarah poured forth blood-curdling and horrible revelations that made it impossible for Almira to be anyone but Ma Bender.
Okay.
They were arrested for theft, but now they got this suspicion on them about the murders. So they have these hearings. And in testimony from Sarah, she told the court that she had been terrified of her mother ever since she was a girl. She recounted a story from her childhood in which she claimed that Almira had beaten a neighborhood child to death.
Lord.
And since her mother couldn't dispose of the body by herself, she made Sarah, who was then 10 years old, go with her and help her as she dumped the remains in a nearby swamp. This is what Sarah's saying.
Yeah.
Sarah said her ma then told her if she ever told anyone about it, she would do the same thing to her. And so, like, that story throws the court into an uproar.
Yeah.
I mean, people are out for blood for this woman now at this point. When things finally quietened down, Almira then took the stand in her defense. Under questioning, she estimated that her number of husbands wasn't 5, but possibly 7. She wasn't quite sure.
Oh, gosh.
So then the women are released long enough to go visit their families before they're taken into custody again and sent to Kansas. They just said, we're going to send you back to Kansas for questioning in these murders.
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah's 3 older children, they were sent to a poorhouse.
Oh.
And, you know, Ricky has told us about the poorhouse.
Yes.
Tell our listeners what that is.
It is a place where you would go. Children would go there when they did not have parents to take care of them. Or, for instance, if single women often didn't have job opportunities and just couldn't provide for their children.
Right.
And so a lot of the times they would, have to go and be taken care of basically, by the state or the county.
Right.
The
one
county.
or the other.
Yeah.
And so her older kids had to go to there while she was, on trial and in prison for this. But they did allow her youngest child to stay with her because she was still nursing that baby. By the time they got to Kansas, Almira had been accused of some heinous things way beyond the murders that had happened on the prairie, which I thought the ones her daughter leveled at her were rough. According to newspapers, and sometimes they exaggerate, but according to the newspapers, she had killed a beggar woman, burned a child to death, bludgeoned one of her husbands with an axe handle, poisoned one of her sons, and so on and so on. But they didn't have any definitive proof that this was Ma Bender.
Okay.
In fact, once they got to Kansas, there were eyewitnesses who had been on the prairie when the Benders lived there, who were allowed to go in and talk with the women in jail and see if that was them. And one of them was Billy Toll, the neighbor who had first realized that their farm was abandoned.
Right.
He went in and talked to them. And when he came out, he said, that's not the Bender women.
Okay.
And he knew them. He was a neighbor. There were witnesses that came forth at the trial in Kansas, some stating, yeah, that's definitely them, and others stating, nope, it's not. And in fact, it was so divided. In the end, 7 of the 16 witnesses testified that the women were the Benders. 7.
Wow.
Yeah. 7 said they were not.
Oh, my gosh.
And 2 were undecided. So it was a tie, and so it was determined, okay, we're just going to have to hold them over until court in February.
Yeah.
Finally, when that came about, evidence was produced that proved neither of the women could be the Benders.
So they just lied on each other?
I guess.
That's
nuts. That is nuts. Almira had actually been incarcerated at the time most of the Bender family crimes had taken place.
Okay.
She had held back the information because she didn't want to make herself look bad, but that was actually her alibi that that got her out of it. She just didn't realize. I'm thinking they probably weren't really that smart. They were probably,
Yeah.
Sarah was able to produce evidence that she wasn't Kate, and so both women were released and returned to their lives of poverty pretty much.
Oh.
There's even some speculation that Kate and John were not even the children of Ma and Pa, and that Ma and Pa were not even named Bender. Some people think that John Bender was actually named John Flickinger.
Okay.
There's just so much now that people don't know and things that have gotten twisted that it's just murky.
Yeah. I would really love to know. I don't know. I just kind of feel like now maybe they were killed by those.
I think they were
seeking justice.
I'm going to think that because I really want to think that.
Yeah.
Their story has become the stuff of folklore, right?
Sure.
So there's one more tidbit of info about the family in folklore.
Okay.
Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Yes.
Author of Little House on the Prairie.
Yes.
She lived in Independence, Kansas as a child.
Right.
Which was very close to the Bender's place.
Yes.
As an adult, she spoke in public and gave an interview at times, more than one time, a couple of times at least, saying that her family had lived there at the time of the Bender family ordeal. She recalled having gone to their store before and their home. She said that Pa actually went on the vigilante hunt for the family when their grisly deeds had been discovered. And her recollection was him stating once that they would never be found. And with a note of finality is what she said. And she said as she grew up, she drew her own conclusions to what he meant by that.
Wow.
Her recollections were printed in the Saturday Evening Post in the 1970s.
Okay.
And if she says, of course, she didn't put any of that in her books because her books are children's books.
Right.
There are some who cast doubt on her story.
Sure.
They say, no, that timeline doesn't add up, that she was only 4 at the time. She's probably not going to have that good of a recollection.
But her dad could have told her later.
Right. And some of them say that she had moved away from Independence before they were found out.
Okay.
But again, it still could, even though she had moved away, her pa could have told her that stuff.
Right.
But there are some who say no, that she just made that up.
Okay.
So either you believe Laura Ingalls Wilder was a liar.
No.
I don't
never.
either. I don't either, because that would sully my childhood stories.
Yes, and I love Paul, so.
Yes, so we're going to go with that story.
Yes.
But I thought that was a very interesting connection.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is speculated. We said that the numbers of victims were upward of 50. That was a rumor. But it is speculated that there were possibly up to 20 victims of the family.
Wow.
That's a lot. That's a lot. And when I said their names were going to be in the papers for months, it actually was years. Their story has been covered over and over. I told you they were sometimes called America's first serial killing family.
Yes.
Well, 10 years later, in the late 1880s, so over a decade later, because that happened in the early 70s. So this is probably almost 15 to 20 years later.
Okay.
Another family named the Kelly family lived south of Kansas in what they at that time called No Man's Land, which is now Oklahoma Panhandle. And between August and December of 1887, they were a serial killing family. It was William, age 55. Kate was his wife. They didn't give her age, I don't think. Their son Bill was 20, and their daughter Kit was 18. And the crazy part of that is that the details of their story is almost identical to the details of the Bender family. There is this guy who has written a book. I'll put it in the show notes. He has written a book saying that he believes they are one and the same. But to me, I'm like, I don't know how that would work.
The timeline.
10 years later, but how could Kate go from being 23 to looking like she's 18?
Yeah.
And how could William, who was 55 then, still look 55?
Right.
He's not going to look 55 a decade and a half later. He's going to look way older.
Yeah.
But the
especially
names
back then, because people age.
But the family makeup was the same. The son, the daughter, the ages, the whole, and some of the names, Kate, Kit, it's just weird.
That's super interesting.
And we had John Sr., John Jr., well, we got William, and then the son is Bill.
Yeah.
But literally, the details, like the cabin, hiding behind the curtain, smashing them in the head,
Really?
almost identical. So you're left wondering,
Yeah.
Is this a copycat family? Is there another whole family out there so deranged that they are copycatting the Benders and want people to think they're the Benders?
Gosh.
Or did they somehow make them, I don't know, somehow pull it off and they really did get away and just went a little further south in Kansas and continue this? Which doesn't seem likely. So that was strange all the way around, because earlier we talked about them being the first serial killing family, and you were like, well, there's more?
Others, right.
Whether they were the Benders or not, we don't know.
Now, were they caught? Were they captured?
They were.
Okay. And were they hanged?
I don't remember the details of
Okay.
that.
I'm going to have to look it up.
Yeah, look up the Kelly family.
Okay.
I mean, but how bizarre is that?
That's nuts. Wow. That's just bizarre to think a whole family would share that passion. I don't know.
For killing?
For murder, yeah. That's crazy.
But, I do think with Kate dabbling in, like, the witchcraft, I do think that opens up demonic spiritual forces. And so that is wickedness in high places.
Absolutely.
So there's that. All right, well, let's just return to the victims. I want to finish. Okay. I don't think we should end with, the Benders. I think we should end with their victims. And so here are the ones that they found there on the property. And prior to that, the May 1871 Mr. Jones, that they think was one of their victims, who was found in Drum Creek with a crushed skull. And then the two identified men that were found in February of 1872 with the same injuries. We don't know them. In 1872, they also found Ben Brown. He was from Howard County, Kansas. He had $2,600 on him that was missing, and he was buried in the apple orchard. Mm. Also, they found W.F. McCrotty. He only had $38, and a wagon with a team of horses went missing. Okay. Henry McKenzie, he was relocating to Independence from Hamilton County, Indiana. He only had $36 and a matched team of horses that were missing. Johnny Boyle from Howard County, he only had $10, but he had a pacing mare and $850 saddle. And that saddle, he was actually found in the Bender's well. Wow. Okay. Yeah. George Lonker, which we've talked about, he and his precious little daughter, who were buried together in the orchard. And we know of Dr. William York. $2,000 was missing off of him, and they found him in the orchard. And they also found John Greery, another unidentified male in the apple orchard, and an unidentified female in the apple orchard. Oh, wow. And various body parts in the orchard that did not belong to any of the other victims that they found there. Okay. And then in 1873, the bodies of 4 unidentified males were found in Drum Creek and the surrounding area. All 4 had crushed skulls and throats cut. One was thought to be possibly a man by the name of Jack Bogart, whose horse was purchased from a friend of the Benders after he went missing in 1872. Okay. So, very unfortunate times for those people.
Yes. Those sure were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
My wife very recently made me watch a movie about the Osage Indians called Killing the Flower Moon, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. But the thing that set this movie apart from all the rest of Leonardo DiCaprio's movies that I regret watching is the way they took a story that should have been told in an hour and a half and drug it out into a 3.5-hour long film. And when the credits started to roll, so did the tears of joy, knowing that thing was finally over. But luckily for you, you have Hard Times and True Crimes, where every single episode is the exact perfect length and has an ending that has been described as the perfect combination of entertainment and enlightenment. So make sure you're telling everybody you know, and a few people you don't, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.